For most of my life I convinced myself that family was forever. No matter how bad things got, no matter how much they hurt me, I kept telling myself that they were my parents and I owed them loyalty. But that kind of thinking nearly destroyed me. For years I lived under their control. My choices, my emotions, my entire life, it all belonged to them. I was never allowed to say no without a guilt trip. If I succeeded, they found a way to tear me down. If I struggled, it was somehow my fault. Every mistake I made, no matter how small, was held against me. And if I ever dared to push back, I was ungrateful. I spent my childhood and teenage years walking on eggshells, constantly trying to please people who could never be pleased. And then one day I just snapped. There wasn't a big dramatic fight. No explosive confrontation. Just a realization. They were never going to change. So I did. I packed my things, moved out, changed my number, and cut them off completely. For the first time in my life I was free. No random phone calls berating me for not visiting enough. No more mind games. No more guilt. Just silence. And that silence? It was beautiful. At first it was terrifying being on my own. I had spent my whole life under their control, making my own choices felt wrong somehow. But day by day I built a new life. I got a job. Made friends who actually cared about me. Found my own little place in the world without them. I was finally happy. Then, after years of silence, they found me. It started with a text from an unknown number. "Hey, sweetheart. We miss you. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. At first I felt nothing. Just cold, empty detachment. But underneath that, a flicker of dread. I knew this was coming. People like them never let go. I ignored it. A few days later, another text. "Please don't do this to us. We're family." Family. Funny how they only remembered that when it benefited them. I blocked the number. Then the call started. Different numbers. Voicemails filled with guilt trips and fake concern. My mom crying, begging me to come home. My dad angry, demanding that I stop acting like a child. I deleted every message. Then a few weeks later, I came home from work and saw them standing on my front porch, smiling. Like nothing had ever happened. Like they hadn't spent years tearing me apart. Like they hadn't been the reason I had to rebuild my entire life from scratch. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. How did they find me? I had never told them where I lived. I had no idea how long they had been standing there. Waiting. Watching. I took a slow step forward, gripping my keys tightly. Every instinct told me to run. My mother stepped closer, her arms outstretched like she expected me to run into them. "Sweetheart. We've missed you." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. She looked me up and down, her eyes filled with fake warmth. "You look so thin. Are you eating enough? We've been so worried about you." I almost laughed. Worried? Where was this worry when they were gaslighting me, guilt-tripping me, and making me feel like I was nothing? Where was this concern when I cried myself to sleep, wondering why I was never good enough for them? And now, after years of silence, they just show up expecting what? A hug. A happy reunion? I gritted my teeth, my body frozen in place. My dad cleared his throat. "So, nice place. You did good for yourself." I didn't take the bait. I knew what they were doing. This wasn't about me. They weren't here because they missed me. They were here because they wanted something. I took a slow, deep breath. "What do you want?" My mom gasped like I had just slapped her. "What do we want?" "Honey, we just wanted to see you. We're still your parents." My dad nodded, stepping forward. "We thought it was time to move past all this nonsense. Whatever you were mad about, let's put it behind us." Nonsense. That's what they called years of emotional abuse. The gaslighting. The manipulation. The way they tore me down until I had nothing left. Just nonsense. I felt something inside me snap. I took a slow step back, gripping my keys so hard my knuckles turned white. I needed to get away from them. But before I could turn around, my mom grabbed my arm. "Sweetheart, please," she whispered. "Just let us in." My throat went dry. Every instinct screamed at me to run. Because I knew one thing for sure. If I let them inside, they weren't going to leave. I should have slammed the door in their faces. I should have turned around, walked inside, and locked every damn bolt behind me. But I didn't. I stood there, frozen, my mother's hand gripping my arm like she had every right to touch me. "Sweetheart, please," she said again, her voice soft, almost trembling. "Just let us in." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. Every instinct screamed at me to run. Because I knew one thing for sure. If I let them inside, they weren't going to leave. My dad cleared his throat, shifting his weight. "Come on now, don't be dramatic. We just want to talk." That word. Dramatic. They used it every time I stood up for myself. Every time I called them out. Every time I tried to set boundaries. I clenched my jaw. There's nothing to talk about. My mother sighed, her grip tightening. Please don't do this. We're family. You can't just shut us out like this. Shut them out? Was she serious? They had spent years tearing me apart. Years gaslighting me, guilt-tripping me, controlling every part of my life. I had finally gotten free and now they were standing on my doorstep, pretending it had never happened? I yanked my arm away. I don't owe you anything, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Not after everything you did. My mother recoiled like I had slapped her. Like she was the victim here. We raised you, my dad snapped, his voice suddenly cold. We gave you everything. And this is how you treat us. There it was. The switch. The fake kindness was gone. Now came the guilt. The manipulation. The same old script. I had been stupid to think this was anything but a game to them. They didn't come here to make things right. They came here because they thought they could pull me back in. I shook my head. Just leave. We just want to talk, my mom pleaded. At least let us explain. Explain? Explain. What was there to explain? The years of emotional abuse? The gaslighting? The way they made me feel worthless? I took a slow step back. I don't need your explanations. I don't need anything from you. The words tasted like steel. My mom's face crumbled. My dad clenched his jaw, nostrils flaring. You're being so selfish, he spat. Throwing away your own family over nothing. Nothing. That word hit me harder than I expected. I felt something inside me crack, but I refused to show it. Instead, I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Nothing? So all the pain, all the gaslighting, all the control, none of that mattered? It was just nothing to you? My mother pressed a hand to her chest, eyes watering. It wasn't like that. We were just trying to protect you. Protect me? I repeated, shaking my head. No. You weren't protecting me. You were controlling me. She opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't give her the chance. You manipulated me. You guilt-tripped me. Every time I tried to stand up for myself, you made me feel like I was the problem. And now, after all these years, you just expect me to let you back in? My dad scoffed. You're acting like we were some kind of monsters. I stared at him, my blood boiling. If you weren't monsters, then why did I have to escape? Silence. For the first time since I had opened the door, they had no response. I took another step back, gripping the edge of the door. You need to leave. Please, my mom whispered. Don't do this. She was crying now. Fake tears. The same ones she had used my entire life. The ones designed to make me feel bad. But I wasn't falling for it. Not anymore. I inhaled sharply. You need to leave. Now. My dad's jaw twitched. He exhaled through his nose. Fine. Be a selfish little brat. See how far that gets you. And just like that, he turned and walked away. But my mother? She lingered. She wiped at her tears, her shoulders shaking. Then as she reached the driveway, she turned back to me. And when I saw the look in her eyes, I felt something cold slither down my spine. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You'll regret this. Then, without another word, she climbed into the car. I stood frozen as they drove off, my heart pounding. The second they were gone, I shut the door and locked it. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt free. Instead, I felt something else. Because when my mother said, you'll regret this, she wasn't just talking. She was making a promise. I locked the door, but it didn't make me feel safe. My mother's last words echoed in my head. You'll regret this. It wasn't a plea. It was a warning. I should have expected what came next. The text started the next morning. Blocked numbers, fake concern. We just want to talk. You're making a huge mistake. Family is all you have. Then the guilt trips. Your mother hasn't stopped crying. After everything we did for you, this is how you treat us? One day we'll be gone and you'll wish you had made things right. I ignored them all. Then came the flying monkeys. A cousin I barely spoke to messaged me out of nowhere. Hey, I don't know what's going on, but your parents are really upset. Maybe you should hear them out. A family friend. You're breaking your mom's heart. Just talk to her. Even my aunt. Your parents aren't perfect, but they love you. Isn't that what matters? I knew what was happening. They weren't reaching out because they cared. They were sent. My parents knew I wouldn't respond to them directly, so they found people who would guilt me into doing it. Classic manipulation. I held my ground. Until they showed up at my work. It was a normal day, until I stepped outside on my break and saw them. Standing by my car. Waiting. I froze. My stomach twisted. My dad was leaning against the hood, arms crossed. My mom stood beside him, eyes red like she had been crying. She took a step forward. "Sweetheart, please. Just talk to us." My hands clenched. "How did you find me?" She hesitated. My dad smirked. "Does it matter?" Mattered. I had never told them where I worked. They had either dug through my past records or stalked me. I wasn't afraid of them hurting me. I was afraid of how far they would go. "Leave," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "Or I'll call security." My mom's face crumbled. "You don't mean that." My dad scoffed. "Look at you. Acting like we're some kind of criminals. We're your parents." I inhaled sharply. "Then act like it. Respect my boundaries." Silence. Then my dad's face darkened. "Fine. Be selfish. But when things go bad, don't come running back." My mother sniffled. "One day you'll understand how much we loved you." I turned around and walked back inside. I didn't look back. But I knew this wasn't over. I thought ignoring them would make them stop. I thought walking away from them outside my job was the final message they needed. I was wrong. Because when people like them lose control, they don't let go. They escalate. The first sign was when I got home that night. I parked my car and hesitated before getting out, scanning the area. Paranoia? Maybe. But something felt off. I walked to my door and stopped. The doormat was out of place. A tiny detail. Something no one else would notice. But I noticed. I reached down and lifted it. A letter. No envelope. Just a folded piece of paper. My chest tightened as I opened it. "We're not leaving until you talk to us. You can ignore our calls. You can block our numbers. But we are still your parents. And we will always find you." I clenched the paper so hard my knuckles turned white. Always find me? I looked around, my pulse pounding in my ears. Were they watching me now? I took a slow, deep breath, walked inside, locked every bolt on my door and called my landlord. "Do we have security cameras?" We didn't. I didn't sleep that night. The second sign came 2 days later. I was at work when my phone buzzed. A new email. From my boss. Subject: Concerned family member inquiry. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. "Hey, my name. A woman claiming to be your mother called today, saying she was extremely worried about you. She wanted confirmation that you work here and to know your schedule so she could drop by to check on you. We didn't give her any info, but I wanted to let you know. Hope everything is okay. They were trying to trap me. First they showed up at my home. Then my job. Now they were trying to get my schedule?" I wanted to scream. I replied quickly. "Thanks for letting me know. If they call again, please don't give them anything. I've cut contact for personal reasons." I didn't bother explaining further. I wasn't going to let them manipulate my workplace into getting access to me. I had tried being nice. Tried ignoring them. It wasn't enough. I needed to take action. The third and final straw came 3 days later. I got home from work and found another letter under my doormat. This one was different. The handwriting was rushed, messy. "You think you can just erase us? You think we'll just go away? You are our child. That will never change." The last line sent a shiver down my spine. "You can't run from your family." That was it. Enough. I pulled out my phone and called the police. Not 911. This wasn't an emergency. But I reported them for harassment and stalking. I filed for a no-contact order. Was it extreme? Maybe. But people like them don't stop until you force them to stop. I changed my locks. Installed cameras. Told my workplace not to let anyone near me without permission. And when my parents tried to contact me again, they got served legal papers instead. Epilogue. It's been 6 months since that night. They haven't tried to contact me since. Not because they respect me, but because they finally understood that I wasn't playing their game anymore. I don't regret it. Not for a second. Because here's the truth. Some people don't deserve a place in your life just because you share DNA. And when someone shows you, over and over, that they will never respect you, believe them. And walk away for good.